So, welcome, Gareth Murray. I am really thrilled to have you here today. Welcome to another episode of Learning for Truth and Love. And one of the reasons I wanted to invite you was my son had an opportunity to attend one of your classes about roller coaster, and it was just great to hear about and learn about what you were doing and what you did. I thought especially it was great for him as a child to get to see what you've done and especially now that we're working on a physics unit, we'll work in making connections. So I'm really excited about that. And so I want to I'll just start by telling us about you and who you are, um, and then we'll go into the career a little later. So just give us a little rundown about who you are.
Yes, well, my name is Gareth. I was born in Los Angeles, raised in Silver Spring, Maryland. My family and I would always take trips to the amusement park as a kid. My very first roller coaster was the Revolution at Six Flags in California. And I was absolutely terrified. And when it was over, I was in love. That's it. and, um, and so, yes. And so, making memories at the amusement park has always been a part of my life. And the structures of roller coasters have always been something I've thought to be beautiful. I remember when I was not about around 9 years old, I got a magazine in the mail and there was a picture of a roller coaster on it. And I just thought it was so beautiful. And so it's been something I've been talking about literally my whole life since about the third grade. All of my friends knew, yes, Gareth he's the roller coaster guy. He said he wants to do roller coasters. He wants to build roller coasters. Everybody knew. If you knew me at all, you knew that that's what I wanted to do when I became an adult. And so, yeah, so it's been a lifelong passion of mine. I'm a father of three. And yes, and I love to teach. Teaching is just who I am. It's something I've done, my whole life, whether with peers or later on in life in formal settings. And so those two things kind of come together in what I do now.
After you did that scary roller coaster, you went back over and over again afterwards.
Yes, yes. The feeling of the fear never went away till I was much older. But that kind of fear, like, oh my goodness, am I gonna make it? Was part of the thrill. I actually miss being scared on roller coasters. I miss it.
Can't relate. I can do that. So now you're an engineer. So tell us from that trajectory from being this child, enjoying these roller coasters, experiencing the thrill. What was your trajectory? What did you do to get to, being an engineer, and how did that influence you? So just, yeah.
Yes. So when I was in the 7th grade, a college recruiter came to my high school and said, "This is the year that counts. Whatever you want to do with your life after high school, whatever college you want to go to, this is the year that counts." And I really took that to heart. I never forgot what he said. And so I just started working my tail off. I had always done well in school, but I didn't really apply myself until 11th grade. And I just went bonkers in the books. And so to get ready for college, because I already knew what I wanted to do. And I got a pamphlet in the mail it was from USC, University of, out in California. And they said in their pamphlet that mechanical engineers design and build the rides at Disney. I said, oh, well, that's what I'm doing. Mechanical engineering. Boop, it's decided. And the funny thing is that deciding to go into mechanical engineering once it was time to go to college, everybody told me, oh, that's so hard. Oh, that's so hard. Like whenever I would talk to college students or people who kind of were ahead of me, they would always say, "Oh my goodness, that's so hard. That's so hard." So going in, I was a little intimidated, unfortunately, but it kind of worked in my favor because that same mindset that I had to really, excuse me, work really hard, I knew that I would have to work even harder once I got to college. Um, so yeah, so I buckled down, uh, decided to do mechanical engineering. I went to Penn State University,
Mm.
uh, and because they had a great engineering program. And yeah, just engineering is all about math. And so, and I loved math already, so that worked in my favor. But the biggest thing was just knowing how to manage your time. If you want to go into a particular field and you're in college and you know what you want to do, I think the biggest thing is just time management. And so that really worked in my favor, working in between classes, after school, not waiting till the end of the day to do homework and these types of things. And then things just kicked off from there.
Wow. I'm thinking, what do you tell the kid who says, I don't like math? I need to write some things down.
Yes.
What do you tell the
Yes.
kid who says, I don't want like math, but I want to become an engineer later on?
Yes. Well, math is something you can learn to love. I think confidence plays a big role. I think that people early in life there's this misnomer like I'm a math person, I'm not a math person, and we kind of just accept that early in life like, well, I'm just not a math person. So we just think, well, I can't do this. Say no, 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 no. Our ancestors invented math. So Africans are math people.
Yeah.
So so let's start there. But with practice, I did tutoring in the summertime. Getting help is not a problem. I got tutoring in college. I never stopped getting extra help. Getting extra help just makes life easier. And when your life is easier, or when math feels easier, then you can learn to enjoy it.
Right. Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that because people don't really, especially kids, you don't make the connection between, choosing to enjoy something that we can choose to enjoy it, right? Just by making small decisions. And sometimes the feeling is not there initially, but it comes along, especially when it gets easier, right? Uh,
Exactly.
Also, our perception of what enjoyment means, right?
Hmm.
Not always equated with hard work. So was it everything you expected? I mean, they said it was challenging. So was it
Yes.
challenging? And what was challenging about it? If
Yes. Yes, it was challenging. The challenge was really in the demand on your time to do it well. So I always had more homework than all of my friends. I always had more projects. I was always in the study hall for longer hours. I was always working more than everybody else. And that's really what made it challenging because it takes time to really absorb and to digest and understand the things you're learning. But if you're willing to put in the time and find people who are also willing to put in the time, that's also a big deal. If you're not doing the journey alone, I feel like study buddies were a lifesaver for me. Having people with kind of the same drive who may not necessarily want to go in the same field as you, but who have the same work ethic, and you just allow that kind of company, that those compadres of people who work hard to work with you. So that was the challenging part. It was just because it just was a lot of work.
yeah,
Yeah.
was it worth it in the end?
Absolutely. Excuse me.
Yeah, I was just joking there. Okay, so it was worthwhile in the end.
Yes, yes, yes. It was. Yes. And I also want to say like, you can still work really hard in college and have balance and have a social life, but you just have to be prepared excuse me, to, maybe sacrifice a few things, but if you're willing to do that, then you'll be fine.
Right. You remind me of something I used to tell my students when I taught high school science. I used to say, you pay now or pay later, right?
Yes, exactly.
You pay now or you pay later with, being regretful that you didn't work hard in the first place. So we seem to make it up someplace, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And having an idea of where you want to go definitely helps, If there's and also when you're going back to the idea of enjoying a subject, if you can somehow connect whatever you're doing at the time to where you want to go, then it makes it a lot easier to put the time in.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And time is something it's so different when you're in college, right? You think, oh, that'll take a long time. And then the time goes. And so it's always important for, college students and even for younger students not to think about time when you're thinking about what you really want to do and you'll enjoy because that time will catch up to you quicker than you think, right?
Yes. 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 Yes.
So before we get to talking about, because I do want to spend a longer time talking about the project, the Universal Studio project you did, not Disney. Tell us about some career trajectories afterwards, like maybe or there other projects you worked on before you got to the what were
Yes. So before that, I worked in the underwater demolitions department at the Naval Surface Warfare Center. So being in the DMV, people who go into engineering, a lot of them end up working for government contractors or kind of military contracts. So that's what's available. All the defense contractors are in the DMV. But it was cool because, I got to blow things up, but in a safe way. I did a lot of finite element analysis, which is basically using math to predict the way structures will change based upon the forces that they experience. And so a lot of modeling, finite element analysis modeling on the computer. And then also to a lesser degree, but still a lot of fun, going to test sites and actually watching some of the tests because they had their own tanks and big water tanks, and they would do explosions under the water. And they had a big red button. There was a big red button that you had to press. I was like, oh, I said, so there actually is a big red button. So that's what I did before the projects with Universal Studios.
It's awesome.
Hmm.
When you said you had to predict structural changes,
Yes.
I can kind of take a guess, but give me an example of what type of, structural change you might have had to predict doing that.
Yes. So let's say you're given a particular warship, and you want to predict how much impact can it sustain when a bomb goes off 30 feet away, 50 feet away, 100 feet away, and so on and so on. What kind of damage will the ship experience? So, and what can it take? And then that can impact your design methods or choices that you have to make in terms of how you design your structure.
Wow. That sounds like a lot of math. I can see physics.
Yes, 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 and engineers, we have software for everything. So, you do have to understand the math behind it, but you don't have to do all the calculations, by hand because you have software that kind of helps you. But you still need to understand what's going on in order to make sense of what the software is telling you.
Some computers.
Yes, yes, yes. And the calculate because there, finite element analysis, there's so many because you're basically. So the term finite element is basically you're breaking something down into a very, very tiny, tiny, tiny piece. And so if you can analyze what's happening on a very small sliver, then you can predict what's happening in the whole once you put all the slivers together. So the computers would take, half a day or run overnight before the simulation was complete. So you really had to make sure your programming and the things you were telling the computer to do were accurate. Otherwise, you just wasted a whole half of a day. You have to start all over. So, yeah.
I'm sure you had the kids and blowing things up. How we all want to be a mechanical engineer now.
Yeah.
But you mentioned so many skills there, right? You talk
Mhm.
about math, you talk about programming, software.
Yep. Yep.
I'm gonna ask you more about skills later on, but I just want you to maybe if you want to give a little, what type of skills. I mean, you're in school, and a lot of times kids ask, "Why do I need to know math?" or "Why do I need to do this?"
Right.
Why do I need to draw? And there's so much
Right.
relevance to drawing. So when you look back at schooling,
Hmm.
what do you think, helped you, whether it's college, what do you think would help students? Like what are things they think they shouldn't pay attention to, for example?
Right. Well, if you want to go into engineering, definitely want to, of course, math. So mechanical engineering in particular, let me say this. Mechanical engineering in particular, you probably get the broadest exposure to all the different disciplines. So you have to do a little bit of electrical, a little bit of structural, a little bit of aerospace. So mechanical engineer is kind of a jack of all trades, whereas the others are more narrow. And because the base is so broad, chemistry, you have to know chemistry. Now, if you go into mechanical engineering, you don't have to go super deep into chemistry, but chemistry is required. And part of that is when you get to, understanding the composition of different materials and how strong they are and what they can withstand, it requires a little bit of at least know-how in chemistry. When you mentioned drawing, learning how to draw with software by hand and by hand. So, because when you, like, for example, if you want to design something, the very first thing you do is you use your hands. You make a sketch, right? And then your sketch will guide the way you create something more formal on the computer, like with a program like SolidWorks or AutoCAD. And some of these programs like AutoCAD, you can actually learn for free. They have programs online where you can kind of just do some digital drawing and learn how to draw on the computer. Yeah. So really every subject really matters, even English and
Yeah.
communication, because as an engineer, it's not just about, okay, you're locked away in a room solving problems and designing things. Well, after you're done solving problems and designing things, now you have to talk about it with other people. You have to share what you've done. And sometimes you have to share what you've done to people who aren't engineers. So how do you communicate effectively this technical thing you've done to non-technical quote unquote people? So even English is very important, and knowing how to write, knowing how to write a story, because even like it's going back to roller coasters. Many times the most fascinating thing about a roller coaster isn't necessarily all the maneuvers that it does. It's the story that it's trying to tell. And how do these movements in the roller coaster tell a story? Right. And so now each element of the roller coaster is now coming alive with meaning because it's within the context of a well told story.
Wow. That's a lot of surprising elements there you're talking about too, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which makes sense. You need to do chemistry, but the story part. I guess we might as well go into the roller coaster. Start by telling us how how you came to be working on this project for Universal Studios, and what was the goal? What was the challenge that you were a part of in doing this?
Yes. So the way I ended up working there was, so again, in college, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So I bought a book. I did some research and I found a book that listed every company that worked on roller coasters in the United States. And they broke it down by state and they listed all the companies. And I emailed and called. Well, I found the ones that I really liked, and I just emailed and called everybody, and just emailed and called and emailed and called and emailed and called, emailed and called. And so some of them responded, some of them didn't. Some of them said, send us your resume, but never got back to me. But there's this one company that I actually didn't know was in my neck of the woods. They were in Maryland, a company called Premier Rides. Actually brought my pen. This is my Premier Rides pen that I got for working there as an engineer. They were in Maryland, and I said, "Oh my goodness, there's a roller coaster company in Maryland," because a lot of them are in Florida, California.
Right.
And so I started hounding them. Never got a reply. So one day I just showed up in person, drove there, walked inside,
Hmm.
physically handed them my resume, and then I got a call back for an interview.
Wow. Like
So
he's so determined. We have to hire him.
so
Persistence.
yes, and that I really think that story is really important for young people, have with a goal in mind, because you might be told no a lot, but that doesn't mean the no is forever. You just have to keep trying, You just have to keep trying. And just because you apply somewhere and they don't give you an interview doesn't mean you can't, doesn't mean you're not qualified. You just have to keep at it, you know. Like baseball, like when baseball players, if they average 3 hits out of every 10 times at bat, that's only 30% success rate, but that's considered very good. So they miss more than they make it, and yet they get paid millions of dollars to miss more than they make.
Yeah.
So same applies to pursuing your career dream.
So you got to working with them on the roller coaster, and what was it you were tasked to do? And or the team or however you did it. Yeah.
Yes. So it was several things. So one thing I did was apart from the Revenge of the Mummy roller coaster, which I'll get into in a second, there were some concept rides that they were working on that I helped kind of review and give feedback on in terms of just the ride concept.
Okay. What do you mean by concept ride?
So a new type of ride that hadn't been built before. They thought it might be fun.
Just a thought.
Just a thought. Yep. Just an idea. Yep. The biggest project was working on the Revenge of the Mummy roller coasters for Universal Studios. So there's actually two roller coasters. They were both called Revenge of the Mummy, but there's two Universal Studios. One is in Orlando, Florida, and other one's in Hollywood, California. So for that ride, I worked on designing a structure to install mechanical brakes.
Mm.
So there are little fins underneath the coaster train, and the mechanical brakes are basically, these mechanisms that squeeze those fins to slow down the ride. And they needed an easy way to install the brakes at particular locations on the track so that they would be aligned with the fins. So I was tasked with coming up with a few ideas for a tool to help install the brakes. I also was responsible for selecting parts for constructing the ride. Roller coasters are very expensive to build. They're between 10 to $15 million to build.
Well,
The Revenge of the Mummy, the thing about Revenge of the Mummy though is it was way more expensive than a traditional roller coaster because it involved, Universal Studios, it's a movie. Like so, you know, there was animatronics, an animatronic mummy, there was pyrotechnics, there was movie screens and audio, and it was a big production. So it was about $40 million to build Revenge of the Mummy. So we had to be very mindful of the parts we chose to build the ride, just like with a Lego set. If you have a Lego set and there's only 50 pieces, it's not going to cost as much as a Lego set that's 1,000 pieces. They cost way more. So the more pieces you have, the more expensive it becomes. So we can't just willy-nilly choose our parts because the cost will add up. So you have to look at, okay, what is this part doing? How strong does it really need to be? Does it need to be built like, does it need to be the strongest thing in the world? Or can we get away with something that's not as strong, but will do the job and it's less expensive? So every nut, every bolt, selecting, adequate parts for different sections of the ride, given the budget that we had. So that was another one of my responsibilities. And the last one was to do heat transfer analysis on what's called linear induction motors. So basically, these are motors that use electricity to generate a magnetic field that can be used to push or slow down the ride. So, because the Revenge of the Mummy was indoors, it was an indoor roller coaster, we couldn't take it up a large lift hill for speed. We had to find alternative ways of pushing it along. So, we use these little motors called linear induction motors. And because they generate so much electricity, you have to send a lot of electricity through them in order to generate a magnetic field strong enough to push a 20-ton coaster train down the track. And so they could get very, very hot. And so one of my jobs was to make sure the properties of the motor didn't melt anything. Yeah.
oh, I'm just thinking all the physics you're talking about. That's amazing. Wow.
Yes. Yes.
So I know oftentimes, I mean, wow, that those are such important, problems that, to address, things
Yes.
that you wouldn't, if you're not working on a roller coaster, you're not going to think about all the details, right?
Right. Right.
So what are in education setting, we have these series of questions we ask students to think about and to as they're constructing whatever it is they're building. So I kind of want to go through some of these with you because I'm so curious as to what aligns, with actual engineering aspect. What are some, starting at the beginning, we ask students to ask questions, right? What are some questions? Well, but before you even go to the asking, what do you what did you know before working in it that was helpful to you, right? And what did you end up learning on the job as you were pursuing it? Because a lot of
Mm,
times as engineers, well, yeah, let me. What did you know, and what did you have to learn? Because we're always asking students to think about what you already know, right?
hmm
In
hmm
order to apply that.
hmm
And so I'm curious as to what that was for you.
Yes. So, well, being a roller coaster enthusiast before showing up just kind of gave me industry knowledge,
Mm,
knowing the names of kind of the big design companies. And because the team that worked on Revenge of the Mummy, was my company was overseeing the entire project, but we weren't the only company working on the ride. So knowing who these different companies are that people are referring to already, just having that industry knowledge was helpful because I knew who they were talking about and I knew kind of what kind of engineers they were in terms of the quality of work that they've done in the past. What I didn't know, well, and also just, engineering concepts that I would have to apply, skills like knowing how to do drawings, technical drawings, understand technical drawings, because that was another thing I did. I organized a lot of the technical drawings so that, you know, if you're building a Lego set, you want the instructions to be as easy as possible. Otherwise, people get frustrated, you make mistakes, right? So we want people building the ride to be as comfortable as possible. We
right.
don't want any confusion. So
Mm-hmm.
making sure these hundreds and hundreds of drawings are organized, well, that was something I had to do. And was something I learned on the job though was that I didn't know before. Going back to the idea of selecting parts, knowing that you had to be intentional with every single part you selected on the ride. And also the fact that, you know, the a lot of the parts that are used, actually other companies, like I was in Granger, the kind of the hardware catalog. I was in Granger a lot. And I said, "Oh my goodness, like, wow. We're just ordering parts from Granger, like, and just selecting, like, here's the catalog and going through, okay, I wasn't expecting that. I thought everything was custom, but it's not. And so that was pretty cool to know.
Yeah. Wow. That interesting knowledge. I mean, all of that. It's because every person will come with a different background, and expectation. But what kind of questions, as you went through the design process and thinking about understanding, what problems and things, resources you had, what are some questions that you ended up asking yourself, as you went through, you know, doing that work?
Yes. So again, cost. How much is this going to cost? How expensive is this to build? For example, the the tool that I was asked to design to help install the mechanical brakes, I had to constantly think about, okay, you know, given this design, how heavy is this going to be? How much easy is it going to be to use? And how much is it going to cost? In school, you never rarely think about cost
Mm-hmm.
for designs. You think about like work, you think about, you know, is it solving the problem? But you're not always thinking about how much will it cost. And that's a big factor
Hmm.
in the field. Like
Yeah.
cost is huge because these companies are trying to make money. How to create something that is efficient in terms of the way it's built and the materials that are used where it can do the job at a low cost is huge. This even goes back to kind of change industries here. Like in the automobile industry, for example, you'll find that a lot of pieces of cars are used over and over again. Headlights, side view mirrors, back components. Like, so you can have like a Toyota.
Hmm.
You have a Toyota Camry and then a different model of a Toyota, but they will all share similar parts with each other. Or like a line of hardware tools, like a drill versus a staple gun versus like the suite of hardware tools. A lot of them will use a lot of the same parts because it's less expensive to make when you can reuse different parts to make something new. And so
Right.
that's just an aspect of engineering that, yeah, that's really important that we don't always think about when you're in school.
Wow. So a lot of times we ask students to imagine, right, and to brainstorm. How much was it? How would you say when it comes to using your imagination and creativity? What would you say you've done or learned as you know, try to think about ideas? Like, how did you go sharing
Mhm.
ideas and things like that?
Yes, I think when it comes to design, for me, I think an important aspect is learning how to trust yourself and be confident, because many times the creative process can be interrupted by self doubt and what anticipating problems or anticipating what others might say can actually interrupt your flow of trying to create something. And so having confidence and joy in the process, to where you just do it, just create something. Don't worry about X, Y, and Z on the front end. Create something first. Now critique it. Now try to make it try to make it better. But if you're trying to answer every problem in the beginning, it slows you down.
That makes sense. I'm gonna pull these questions together because a lot of times we talk about the planning phase.
Hmm.
When you compare it to the planning and the actual building and testing and refining phase. I don't know if you can you speak to that.
Yes.
In the meantime, I want to ask people to put questions in the chat. I'm going to look at the chat and see what questions people have. Go ahead.
Yes, sure. So yes, the process even that we referred to earlier, from mind to paper to computer to actualization. So in terms of the design process, everything is digital. Everything is digitized. Somebody at some point wrote something down, but then once it's time to share it with other engineers, you have to make a computer model of it, and nothing is happening in a vacuum. So the groups of people working on the ride will continue to expand as you go through those phases. The initial design concept is a very small group of people. Once once it's ready to, for other engineers to be involved, now the circle widens, and then once the testing is ready, now the circle is even wider. And so it's really a team effort. And so, yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. So, as you finished working through this project, right? Was it everything you expected?
Yes.
What advice would you have for people?
Yes, it was a dream come true. It was literally a dream come true. And I was fortunate enough to know what I wanted to do at an early age, you know? And so, if you find something that you enjoy, it won't feel like work at all. It just won't. Um once you find well, let me say this too. Once you find something that you enjoy, and you've garnered a measure of self confidence, then the work environment doesn't feel like work at all. At all.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. That's what we tell people. But it's still, if people tend to think, oh, there's a saying, if you love something, of course you won't work a day in your life. But you're always going to have moments where you do have to persevere, where you have to think about, you know, yourself as a worker.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Now, I want to think of this a little differently in terms of, you, especially for some of our children. I focus on Black representation in my work. And so, what advice and what are some challenges that you think you might have had, maybe because you were a Black male, right?
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
you're a Black man. And what advice would you have? Like, how do you think maybe, being that, Black man might have um, positioned you differently or things like that? Can you speak to your experience
Yes.
in that way?
Yes. Okay. In the field, or just in general, from college going all the way up?
Both?
Both? Okay.
I'm really curious about both. You could just
Yes.
which one you're
Yes.
referring to. Yeah.
Yes. So from the on the you definitely have to be prepared for naysayers. I was 17 years old. I went to a college fair, and there was a representative, I won't even name the institution. I gave him my resume. He looked me in the eye and said, "You're not college material." I'm at a college fair, and the guy saying, "You're not college material." The funny thing is I still applied to that school, and they offered me a full scholarship. Now I didn't go because, partly because of my experience with the recruiter. But, yeah, so you have to be prepared for not listening to people who should know better. In college, I went to a PWI, I went to Penn State, so there wasn't a lot of Africans there. When I was in class, I was often the only Black person in class. That wasn't as challenging for me just because I found one really good friend who worked as hard as I did. And so I didn't feel alone, even though I was usually the only Black person there. I didn't feel alone. Sitting in the front of the class is key. Students like sit in the very front. Don't sit in the back. Don't sit in the middle. Sit in the very front so you don't get lost in the shuffle. And so that it helps you pay attention as well. Yeah. And then also, Penn State had some issues with, Black folks were being targeted with violence. There's a certain period while I was there. So that was a challenge. And yeah, but
You
because
mean,
the school I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you mean by other students?
Yes, by other students and by unknown folks in the community. They're just driving around, just assaulting people. Yeah. Fortunately, Penn State had 50,000 students. Out of those 50,000, the Black population was like 8%. But 8% of 50,000, you can find your people, um, in that ocean of, so, so community was really important. Church was very important for me as well because I went to a Black church. So even though I was in a predominantly white space in school, I was in Black spaces outside of school, which is really important for me. As a professional, I was very fortunate to work in environments where I didn't really feel microaggressions or anything problematic. Like when I worked for the underwater demolitions department, my boss was Hispanic and he knew a family friend of mine. And so I just never had any problems. And then once I got to Premier Rides, the engineering team was relatively diverse. And again, I didn't have any problems. I feel like part of me was also just so excited to be there. I wouldn't I didn't even care what anybody else had to say. I was just I was on cloud nine. So yes. So most of my bad experiences with, trying to navigate the world as a Black male was in college more so than as a professional. Yeah. And I'll also say something too about anyone who's interested in the engineering or roller coaster engineering field in particular. Sometimes, well, I guess this could apply to other fields too. Sometimes when you think of the thing you want to do, sometimes there might be some very big companies associated with that particular field or expertise. So like when you tell people you want to design roller coasters, people think work for Disney, right? Disney's a very, very large company. So if you work there, you're not going to be given a lot of responsibility right away because there's so many engineers. Whereas if you go somewhere smaller, I went to Premier Rides. Premier Rides was a very small company. It's like 13 engineers. So you get a lot of responsibility right away, right? So think about that when you're applying for internships, when you're trying to get your foot in the door. Don't be afraid to apply somewhere small because if you get your foot in the door somewhere small, you're going to get a lot more experience than you would somewhere at a big place where you're just doing busy work.
So, wow. So, in anticipation of what maybe some kids might ask, I want to say, so other than roller coasters, what did you enjoy doing as a kid?
Yes, as a kid, I loved sports. I played baseball, basketball, soccer, volleyball. I loved video games. I loved making music. I play the drums, I play the keyboard, and I love music, always love music. What else? Those are the big ones. So sports, music, video games. As a kid, that's the trifecta. That's the trifecta right there. Yeah. And music really, really gave me balance. Like there's just an itch that nothing else can scratch but music. So learning, and you don't always have to learn an instrument to play in front of an audience. Like when when I was early on in college, I decided I wanted to learn how to play the bass, and I never played in front of people. I just learned it for myself because at least for me, there's something very calming, therapeutic. There's just balancing about playing an instrument and making music, creating things, and so and sometimes kids today feel like, well, if I learn an instrument, that means I have to have a recital. It means I gotta perform. But I would encourage kids to learn music just to feed your soul, to feed yourself, because there's things about it that you just can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, and also when I think about music, I think about when I listen to, especially when my son was younger, I would listen to all the math they would talk about. All the math. I was like, wow, I wish I had a recorder to see all the fractions. When you're trying to do 4-4 versus 2-4, and all the fractions, conceptually.
Hmm.
So I mean, there
Hmm.
was just a lot of math in there. You build that
Absolutely.
learning.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And studies show that, kids who are in band learn how to read music usually do well in their other subjects as well, because
Yeah,
you're working a part of your brain that benefits you.
absolutely. Almost like you're linking different parts of your brain too. But so thank you so much for joining us today. And if you like this episode, please like it and please subscribe so that you can get the future recordings of Learning for Truth and Love. Thank you.